Welcome to the beginning of a new series where I will be creating a one-to-one scale fantasy city in Minecraft. This city is called Starfall. We will start by creating the terrain and world painter. After opening World Painter, go to File and New World. Name it whatever you want and change the version to what you will be using. An average size of a downtown city is about 2 to 3 miles on a side or 3 to 5 kilometers, so I'll be using that for my measurements here. I also plan to make a very large mountains, so I'm going to increase the world height to 1023. And with those settings, we can begin. We're going to start by annotating the coastline here and the mountains. This is an important step in just kind of setting out everything that you're going to need for the next steps of actually detailing the terrain that you're making. Inside of the city, there's also a portion called the Underworld, which is effectively a sinkhole, large sinkhole, that has then hence been developed. I'm also marking out the larger part of the downtown, along with another portion called the Mid-City, which is an elevated portion of the city. We'll get into showing all of that in later parts of the series. And then put in the river connecting into mountain range and connecting to the Gulf of the city. Here I'm going to be showing some coastlines to just vaguely show what we're going to be going for while making the coasts of the city. So going around, I'm just going to drop the water level a bit so that we have some variation in here. And I'll be working more on the coastlines later when I do the training steps with the mountains. But for now, I just flattened out the entire seabed and I'm using the smooth tool to make a gradual transition from seabed to the actual level of the city. When I did this, it left a few strange fragments behind, but I thought they looked good, so I'm going to keep them around. Now onto more advanced parts of the coastline, we can see that a lot of islands and peninsulas usually are longer in the same direction and then shorter in the same direction. And they can sometimes turn the direction, but it's usually gradual. So you can see here, this longer part points at this island that those other longer parts point at. Over here, we can also see that all of these peninsulas kind of move in the same way. None of them are really perpendicular to the other ones. And as we can see here along this coastline, all of the islands kind of have the same flow to them, if you will. There's also another topic of coastlines that I'll get into, and that is that one side of a coastline will be smooth on most bodies of land, while the other side is kind of rougher. Here we can see in Britain and Denmark, they both have smooth sides and one more rough side with more islands. Same here in Greece. So now we can come back to our map and start applying these techniques, or just applying this knowledge of the real world to make a more realistic coastline. Alright, now I also want to start working on the mountains. As we can see here on Google Maps, mountains are made of a lot of ridges, and where these ridges intersect is where you usually get peaks. And at a point where mountains go back into flatland, they have a lot of these kind of Y-like ridges that then connect down. I'll try and show more of these later. I'm going to start by elevating the land here, so we can just get a general higher part for the mountains to be sculpted out of. Looking back over here at some pointier mountains, we can see that there's a lot of ridges and stale Ys going into the valleys, or ridges that kind of just divide into smaller ridges. That's kind of the whole process of making mountains you're going to want to look for. Just make these long ridges with some parts that stick out, and then from there just elevate certain areas and lowering other areas around there to make more defined ridges. Here in the Himalayas, we can see that there's still a similar effect of a very large ridge, which is the entire mountain range. And then from there, there's more ridges and more ridges. Now, usually ridges divide in a Y shape, which is why most triangular peaks are, or most mountain peaks are triangular. And we're going to be working on making not really round peaks, but we're going to want to shape them using the brushes that we have into triangular peaks. And from there, you can just use your own artistic freedom and design basically whatever you want. You don't have to follow the rules of what you see in real life. It's just if you want to make something look more realistic, it's suggested. At least I would suggest it. Then up here in the mountain ranges, I'm just adding smaller divots where water might flow through, and I'm planning to make these into mountainous lakes later on. Now it's just a lot of scoping that's going to take a while, making a bunch of bridges that usually flow in the same type of direction if they're coming from the same point. It's a lot of Ys, peaks, and yeah. Now that we have the mountains done, I'm going to start working on some more tweaks to the land, just raising the general elevation as it goes into the mountains. I'm also going to start to edit the river and coastline a little bit, as well as create this sinkhole portion of the city. I'm basically just going to do the same thing that I did for the other parts of the coastline for the sinkhole portion, except then use the sponge tool to get rid of the water. I'm going to start editing the actual coastline so that it looks better and more realistic with the same islands and peninsulas moving in the same direction. Then I'm moving on to a few plateaus or smaller mountains that kind of exist near the larger mountains. Now I'm going to be working on creating some of the trees I'll be using for the forests. This is going to be a somewhat repetitive process, and I'm going to try using Axiom, which I haven't used before, so wish me luck. But the trees I'm going to be using are going to be pretty simple, as they're just going to be large spruce trees. I don't plan to add too much variation to the forests just yet. I may change it later in the series, but for now I'm just going to go with a variety of spruce trees. I'm just using World Edit to make the trees have the shape that I need, and then I'm also just gonna finish off with getting rid of some of the other leaves that I don't need there. Then I'm gonna use Axiom to try and copy and paste the trees and affect their height. I want a wide variety of heights of trees so that the forests just look more natural. Because if all the trees are all the exact same, it's not gonna look good. So I'm going to make four base heights of trees. One of them is going to be small, and then there's another one that's going to be kind of medium sized, and then a large one. And then I'm going to make a very large one, which I called the massive tree. From here, I'm also going to make three variations of these four trees, just to add even more variation to what we'll find in the world. Each of these three variations will have different trunks and leaf patterns, just to make them better. I'm just doing some final tweaking with changing up how the leaves and trunks look here. So, let's watch. I'm also making sure that all of the base blocks of the trees are solid. I'm using spruce wood, and that's important so that when I import these into the actual World Painter software, they create a foundation that doesn't have weird holes in it, because I'll be using the Extend Foundation feature. Next up, because World Painter isn't updated for the most current versions of World Edit, I need to do this weird workaround where I basically share the file and then download it from an online browser. If you use, I think, the 1.20 version of World Edit instead, it should be fine. I was just using 1.21, which is my issue. Now I'm loading the trees into World Painter. I'm going to load all the files up, and then I'm going to change their relative frequencies so that the medium trees are the most common, and then the small, large, and massive trees are less and less common. I want the massive trees to be quite stand out compared to the other ones, so I'm going to make their rarity quite, or their frequency quite low. I'm going to do some final tweaks to the terrain here. I'm just going to be raising some parts of the flat elevation while also adding some lakes to the mountainous and other parts, just to add some more variety here for us to work with later. Alright, now that that's done, we can move on to the actual texture of the terrain. For that, I will be using grass, thick snow, frost, sand, gravel, and our custom objects layer, that being for the forests. Starting with grass, we kind of just apply that to all low land and flat areas, and then we're going to apply deep snow to highland areas. But we only want to apply deep snow to either very highland areas or high-ish land areas that have kind of a lower steepness to them. So as we can see here, snow likes to pile in portions that aren't particularly steep. So we're just trying to replicate that here. Now I'm going to take out a brush and just kind of brush on the frost layer. This is going to be thin snow, or just like snow layers in Minecraft. And it also freezes water, so I'm just going to use a filter to make it so that it just goes over water, because I want to add the frost to the water later on to make it look better. I'm also going to be adding frost to some of these higher elevated parts, and then also just kind of scattered around the city. Now I'm adding frost to the water. I'm just going to do it around the edges and not as much in the middle, except for maybe in some of these higher in the mountain areas. Just that it's kind of more realistic and conveys a time of maybe summer to fall, but in a northern country. Now I'm going to be applying Podzo, and with the Podzo, I'm going to be putting on the forested area. So I'm just going to be using some basic operations to make the Podzo, and then I'll be brushing on more of it where I think that it would be best fit to have forest. After all the Podzo is on, I'm going to use a global operation to target the Podzo, and then just apply the custom object layer there so that it creates the forests there. And then I'm also going to use a brush to brush on either denser or less dense parts of the forest, depending on how much I want the trees to be close together. So over here in the lower region, I thought that some denser parts would be nice, but then less dense parts near the string of lakes where there should be more small town or pathway. It's quite likely that in the actual process I'll remove more trees, but for now this is a good working point. Next up, I'm applying sand around most of the lakes and ocean, and above the sand layer, which is going to be 2 or 3 blocks, I'm also applying a single layer of gravel, just because I think it looks cool. And it's somewhat realistic in certain areas, but it, looks good. Alright, and then once you're satisfied with all of the terrain that you've made, I'm going to use the export function to a Minecraft map. Make sure that you're in creative and have all the proper settings, like the world version and everything. And then about 14 minutes later, it has exported to the correct folder and everything, so we can load it up. And here we are. We're spawning somewhere near the top of the Gulf. I'm just going to kind of run around and see about fixing everything that looks out of place. There's a lot of really rough terrain in this flat area, so I'm just going to take out the smooth tool and just run over it to try and make it look better. The actual cliffs don't need to be smoothed out, because if you do that, they're going to lose their texture and details, so you don't want to smooth out the cliffs, just the flat area. If you want, you can use the filter on the right hand side to make it so that you only affect low slope areas. Now I'm looking at some of the mountains and forests, which I think look pretty good. And I'm just looking at the underworld to see if there's anything wrong with the sinkhole or if I should edit anything. And this step's really just flying around and looking for things that don't look quite right, going to the ground and seeing if anything looks off, and then just check everything. If anything looks bad, go back into World Painter, edit it, save it, and then hopefully on your next load it'll be better. I noticed that this part looks quite flat, just kind of unnaturally flat. So I take out just a standard noise brush and start elevating some parts, not to make them look rough, but just to add some hilly variation. Next up, I'm checking out some more southern areas, including the forests. I just want to make sure that the variation in tree height is what I'm looking for, which it's somewhat off. I'm looking at the forests, and I think that they look pretty good. Look good variation, but I think that the massive and large trees are a little too common. So I'm going to come back into World Painter, select my custom object layer, and then just lower all of those frequencies a bit more, so that there's a kind of basic tree line with only a few large trees poking out of it. I like how the forests have these kind of open areas, and I thought that it might look cool if it was darker and kind of spooky, but yeah, I didn't stay on that for very long. I also noticed that there were some trees spawning on sand, and I didn't like how that looked, so I just went back into World Painter, went to Global Edits, and then just removed my custom object layer from all sand. Now all of that terrain is done. I'm going to say that that is the final part of step one of creating a large fantasy city in Minecraft. Thank you everyone for watching. And please do like, share, and subscribe so that I can continue to grow my channel since I'm, basically nothing at the moment. And I hope you all have a great day. Bye.